Hello and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a podcast that's sorry if you feel like Priti Patel has been bullying you. And how are you, Rob?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, no, keeping well. I feel like I've finally hit my 30s because today, for the first time, I pre-ordered something. And no, it's not one of those new shiny consoles that everyone's talking about. I pre-ordered a goose for Christmas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
I was just like,
that is
went to my local butcher's and pre-ordered my goose. And I'm like, you know, I've never done anything like this before. I've always been the person who rushes around on Christmas Eve and just buys something. So, yeah.
Well, you might have to plan your Christmas this year a little differently, because I think we're going to mention that in our headlines.
Yeah, we will. But well, let's move on into those headlines. So, first from The Telegraph. A week of Christmas freedom on the cards.
This is the news that, as I'm sure everybody in England is aware, we're in a lockdown at the moment, and it's had a few people asking, what are we going to do for Christmas? Before then, we had the rule of 6, so people were already thinking that there would be a smaller Christmas than possible. Obviously, if we were in lockdown, then it would be a very different Christmas for everybody because you're used to getting the whole family together for, a large majority of people. And secondly, how is the government going to enforce that? I think there was a big worry from the government side that if you tried to stop people going to their families' houses for Christmas, a large majority of the population would just ignore it or try and sneak round it, and you'd be left with sort of a nightmare of how you actually clamp down on people breaking the law. Because if everybody's doing it, then it's kind of impossible. So
I think it was the Metropolitan Police Commissioner who basically said, well, I'm not going to be barging down people's doors on Christmas Day and arresting them because, like basically they know they can't enforce it, so they have to kind of make it okay anyway.
Yeah, precisely. This is the news that, also unsurprisingly, if you want to be a prime minister who's popular in the country, you were probably going to let people have Christmas. There's no way around that. So, as the Telegraph's reporting, a week of Christmas freedom on the cards. I've heard like 5 days, 6 days. It appears the government is looking at a time period, like a length of time over Christmas where you can where you can meet members of the family and exchange gifts like you would do for a welcome slice of normality this year, sometime in 2020. Yeah,
and I mean, I think we'd already expected it would be a bit different. I don't know how it is for you, but I like seeing my family in the context of Christmas to have like a big get-together thing. But there's no reason why, with the size of our family, the extended family, we can't like break it up into chunks. And yeah, it's a shame not to have everyone in one place. But, for 1 year, like for the 1 year, we could do the thing where it's like, the original plan was when it was rule of 6 and all of that, we'd meet up, stagger pub meetings over several days so that we could meet all the people. I get if people have to travel half the country to see all their family, it's a bit different. I'm just fortunate, I suppose, to be in that position where it's not a terribly long drive to get to everyone I want to see. So it's so dependent on what your family's on. But I think I basically accepted sometime in September that this was not going to be a normal Christmas, so I've already planned for it. And this is my first Christmas, like not living with housemates or anything, living in a flat with my partner. So that makes it special in a different way. So it's kind of nice that, I've always thought that Christmas Day would eventually become this day, which would just be me and my close family anyway. So I think it's very different for other people. It's just how people do Christmas. So following on from that, the Daily Mirror headline: the cost of Christmas. 5 days of extreme lockdown for every day spent with family. And what's that about? Because I've heard this, I've seen this headline, and it's kind of, it doesn't sound like it really tracks and makes much sense directly. Like, I think if you were going to have some kind of locking down of yourself, like you'd want to quarantine yourself for 2 weeks prior to meeting people to ensure everything was safe. So the 5 days, I'm just a bit unsure about.
I think this is the idea that, we're in a lockdown at the moment, and obviously people are keen to come out of a lockdown by the time we go, Christmas goes around the corner. That's specifically the reason why the government appeared to time the lockdown like they did, saying, right, we'll go into a second lockdown over November in the hope that in December, cases will have gone down to a point where we can start easing things again in the run up to Christmas. This appears to be as a direct cost of so many families mixing potentially on Christmas Day or around that time. We might go into a lockdown again in January.
Right, I see.
To sort of make sure that the virus doesn't spread after the fact. So I don't know. When I read this, I was like, oh yeah, is it? I wonder if you put that option to people saying you can have Christmas like you normally do, but all of January there's going to be a lockdown. How many people would actually take that bargain? Is it worth it? Because I was weighing it up in my head, and I said I wouldn't mind having a smaller Christmas for a year if it meant that if we didn't have a full lockdown in January. I don't know. Like Christmas means different things to different people, but it is worth saying. I thought it was just worth bringing up the point that the coronavirus isn't popping up to the North Pole so everybody can have Christmas and then coming back afterwards. It's still going to be a thing. And that time will have consequences, and this appears to be the biggest consequence of them. And
I think one more thing there is, like, when you say that's a choice presented, it's not a choice that everyone gets to pick. Firstly, there are people who are isolating for various reasons, who don't really have a choice in the matter whatever happens. But even if it was like presented as a choice like this, it's not like we get a vote on it. It's based on people's behaviour. So you're kind of in the position where you might as well have a normal Christmas, because if everyone's going to be doing that, we're all going to be locked down in January. And I think you get into some of these kind of more problematic psychological things that have happened during the pandemic, where it's like, well, I've been being good, but other people haven't, so now we're stuck in a lockdown kind of thing. And you see these kind of circular arguments, and it's why I think people often get quite angry when they see posts of like people like going out and doing things. They're like, well, I've been, and it's like, well, it's a really hard line to walk, because like, if the rules have allowed, as long as people aren't breaking the rules, if someone has followed the rules at all points, you can be like, well, they always follow the rules. And that's why the rules are there. But people who have opted to stay at home, for example, for the duration, who didn't need to, could feel like, oh, well, I'm being negatively affected because of these people going out and about. But if those were the rules, I suppose a good example is the Eat Out to Help Out scheme over the summer. Most people I know definitely went for at least one of those meals because it was a good deal, and that was the point of it. It was a government incentive. And like with perverse incentives, the negative was we then had to go into a lockdown partly due to the fact that everyone kind of got used to going out again over the summer. And it's a very hard line to walk, and it's definitely not been perfectly walked by the government or by people throughout. But it's like one of these things where it's very hard to like pick everything apart and understand what decision you should make, even if something is technically allowed. I mean, I know for my part, like I try not to go out without due reason, I've gone to work in central London several times since this all started. And that's because I've got work to do. I don't go in every day, but there are definitely some people who go in every day because, who aren't key workers, for example, because their office is open or whatever. I know with this lockdown, it's a bit different because some places are open and some aren't. It's still an interesting thing to look at. So having delved a bit deeper there into something that's, maybe a bit depressing, some good news: The Express, COVID jabs for all by spring.
Yeah, this is the positive news. We've had now 2 pharmaceutical companies come out and announce that their vaccines are entering like the last stage of the trial. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's 2 big announcements. We had the Pfizer one, which we mentioned, I think. Actually, no, we might not have mentioned it last time because it might have been after our recording.
No, we didn't mention it last time. It was after.
Yeah, so it was the Tuesday after, because I think Trump was complaining that they were waiting until the election had happened to release this information, which of course is not true. But yeah, Pfizer did, basically they can do a look at the data a bit earlier on. So they were hoping for a 30% effective vaccine, because the idea is then if you give it to everyone, that will essentially have the effect we need. But this initial look, which is on about half of the data they plan to collect, I think they found it was 90% effective. And that's one of these new mRNA vaccines. And then not long after, Moderna came out and made a very similar announcement. I think I can't remember now, but theirs was also in the range of 90%. So
it was 95%. I remember that because there was a joke because this is a very real thing that happened, but Dolly Parton helped to finance that drug or donated to that drug in some way, which is why there was a joke going around that's why it's 9 to 5% effective. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, there are 2 vaccines now. So the benefit of it being 2 as well, if they get all the final approval, and it's sounding like there will be some kind of approval probably coming in December, at least in the UK. It will be different in other places depending on what their approval processes are. But at least it sounds like, with the extra data they'll have got in that meantime and finishing up the study, And then, so I think the thing needs to be clear is that no corners are being cut here or anything like you'll see some people saying. It's the same process, but the main speed difference here is partly funding, due to people like Dolly Parton. But the funding is often a big problem with vaccines, because if you need to convince someone to give you money to deal with a vaccine in the third world or something like that, that's generally a harder thing to convince people of than a vaccine that helps people in rich countries. See the polio vaccine, for example, which was a big problem for all families in America at the turn of the century and stuff like that. So there's a reason these certain things get focused on. So that's part of it. But funding, a lot of vaccine development is being refused funding. And the other thing is that normally you don't have that many cases. The incidence rate of most like really bad infections is a few percent. And also it depends, like, in your local area. The benefit with the coronavirus one is that there are so many people potentially being exposed, you can do a really good clinical trial just by, picking a certain number of people and letting them go out into the world. So it's, I want to be clear that I know that some places, some people talk about, oh, it's been rushed, etc. It's like, it has been only as rushed as is possible, like, because they gave a lot of money to it, so there are more people working on it to actually come up with the candidates. The only thing that we won't necessarily have at this point, because it's still going under an emergency authorization, but there are things like, will it have side effects with medicines, things like that. Those are kind of things you can't find out until later on. And the way this process works for, say, drugs and vaccines is that they basically, you report adverse effects as a doctor as and when they happen. So you would see, like, over time, you would build up, like, what, where there could potentially be problems. So the only thing I've seen about this is that you might get told by your doctor, especially if you're someone who's isolating due to weak immune system, you might be told, don't take it just now, just continue isolating because we'll see how everything kind of shakes out. But that's the only kind of real difference between that and a normal vaccine. Like, normally when you have a vaccine, you're told all the risks, etc. It's like with the flu vaccine, you can get flu-like symptoms, and if someone has quite a weak immune system, then that could be worse for them than it is for me as someone with a fully working immune system. So it's stuff like that. But yes, I just want to be clear on that point.
But yeah, good news. Finally, like the vaccine, light at the end of the tunnel. Of everything, all of this, and yeah, just I think the UK has got doses of the first vaccine, haven't they? The second one, they're a bit at the back of the queue for, because that's a US and then the EU all bought in a big bulk order and we bought later. So that second one we might not get until later in the process, because obviously the whole world is asking for the vaccine. So it will come out in different places, in different doses, I'm sure, at different times. But it really seems like the whole of the NHS and the government is stepping up a huge vaccination programme, probably, like they say, the Express says in the spring. I've heard other newspapers say Easter. The truth is nobody quite knows at the moment. But it looks like we are going to continue lockdown or like the tier system life in the early part of 2021. But maybe by summer, maybe there would be some ease.
The only other point I want to add on this is it's good to see multiple companies coming out with decent vaccine candidates. Obviously, there's loads of people trying, but the fact that there are two really effective and viable vaccines that look like they're going to come into the market very soon means that you don't have the problem of one company owning it and setting the price. And I know there was a whole load of stuff about, pre-buying it so that the prices wouldn't go too high, etc. But it's very important because this is the thing that's affecting the whole world. And it would be really bad if we end up in the situation where we go, oh, we fixed this in the Western world, and then suddenly, like, Africa and India suddenly have like large spikes, for example. So it's a good thing that there's multiple candidates out there using this technology. That also means there can potentially be more vaccines coming on with improved efficacy or less negatives, as they go on. So it shows that it's something that can be vaccinated against, which was a thing people were concerned about earlier in the year. And it shows that you can be very effective against it. So hopefully there will just be multiple people coming out with very similar vaccines that, can achieve the results we need. So that's a good thing as well. Okay, I think we're going to move on into our main story, which was, well, depending on who you are, I suppose is also another piece of good news to come out of 2020. So Dominic Cummings is out. Is this a fresh start for our government? So do you want to give us kind of a rundown of what happened over the last 2 weeks? It was mostly last week, wasn't it? The actual stuff happened over about a day.
Yes, yeah, it all kicked off, I think, there were reports coming out from the PM's office that the director of communications, Lee Kane, was going to be promoted, I believe, to be sort of like a more overall head of everything. And then that story quickly changed into the fact that Lee Kane was going to leave Downing Street. So it's odd that a promotion would turn into that, but what appeared happened was that you've got Lee Kane, who used to be involved at the Daily Mirror. One of the jobs he had at the Daily Mirror was, do you remember during the when was the last time David Cameron got elected? 2015 election campaign, where David Cameron was sort of reluctant to do any, where David Cameron was reluctant to do any debates against the then leader, Ed Miliband, because essentially in 2010, the Conservatives felt that David Cameron's poor performance at that had led to there being a coalition government rather than winning outright. Because of his refusal to do this, the Mirror sent Lee Kane in a chicken suit to badger David Cameron over several times and have his photo taken with him. So it's an odd start for a man who would rise to become director of communications, in government at the moment. But that's what he started off doing. Then he moved into the Vote Leave campaign, and that's where he met Dominic Cummings, and that's where those two sort of became vital cogs in the machine to act in Boris Johnson's government. Apparently, what's been happening behind the scenes is there's been a bit of a power struggle within Number 10, maybe brought on by the new press secretary who's been brought in, Allegra Stratton, her job is meant to be the government's mouthpiece during press conferences. So a bit like they have in the White House where you have a press secretary there, the idea is she would, rather than Boris Johnson's being at the podium, she would stand in for the government and would be their voice on all of these issues. She came in and essentially said, I would like to report directly to the Prime Minister, whereas Lee Kane said, no, you've got to report to me and I will report to the Prime Minister. So there were already tensions building up there. Secondly, I think if you can talk about what one of the government's main weaknesses have been, particularly during the coronavirus outbreak, is that maybe communication hasn't been their strong point, or hasn't been all that clear. We've talked previously about the number of U-turns that the government has been forced into, and maybe they've been slow to react. We highlighted on a couple of podcasts ago how their communication, particularly with Manchester, and how that was shown to the world, was really poor as well. So the fact that Lee Kane was the man responsible for this, him getting a promotion didn't seem to really fit with everything. So again, this promotion might have been, seen to him as he was being pushed aside into a role where he couldn't get involved with that side of things. The other thing to notice about Lee Kane is that we've mentioned how he was a right-hand man to Dominic Cummings. Cummings saw him as very important to keeping his grip on power within Downing Street. So it appeared that Dominic Cummings said that he would resign if Lee Kane were to be forced out of his position. This led to a bit of a briefing war against the two and against others within government. Most notably, it said that Carrie Symonds, the Prime Minister's girlfriend, didn't approve of Cummings or Kane, and that Cummings in particular had a nasty nickname for her, which is Princess Nut Nuts, which, okay, like, it's a pretty, if you're looking to have a go at somebody, I think it's a rubbish nickname. Like, I think it's a rubbish, playground nickname to call anybody. I don't think it makes sense. I can't understand where it sort of comes from. But it's fun to say.
Maybe that's part of it.
But I don't. Maybe that's part of it. But I don't know if it's sort of like. It struck me as one of those things like if Dominic Cummings is kind of like a self-professed genius or thinks that he's a great Machiavellian thinker, and I think he's secretly quite pleased of the way that he's portrayed as such. The fact that the best nickname that he can come up with for Carrie Symonds is Princess Nut Nuts really suggests to me that he's not as genius or Machiavellian as he thinks he is. But anyway, so all of this seemed to be coming to a head. Everybody thought, the Prime Minister isn't going to get rid of Cummings. If he didn't get rid of him for the Barnard Castle thing, why would he get rid of him now? But then a day after Kane's departure, in an interview, or not in an interview, but in speaking to Laura Kuenssberg, Cummings said, "Oh, my position on my blog hasn't changed." And the position on his blog said that he thought that he would be not needed or out of government by January 2021. And as it was, we had some quite eye-catching photos of Dominic Cummings leaving the front of Number 10 with a big box of his stuff, as it was announced that, yes, he would be stepping down for his role in the very near future. I don't know if did you see these pictures at all?
I have seen several, yes. I think, obviously when cameras train on the door of 10 Downing Street, there's going to be lots of photos, and they'll pick the best ones. But yeah, they were quite powerful looking. That they kind of the kind of thing where if you saw them as your newspaper front page, you'd expect, oh, that's the kind of thing people might be talking about in a few years. So it definitely feels like it made an impact. Yeah,
and I think that the whole point of that is that that's another Cummings moment of him wanting to make an impact. Like, there is a back door to 10 Downing Street. You can slip away unnoticed if you want to. I think several people do every day. So the fact that he kind of orchestrated this, I'm going to walk out the front of 10 Downing Street with a big box, which I think is what people only do in American movies, rather than what actually happens when you leave your job. Again, maybe said something to me as the man and how he likes the spotlight, or how he's seen his role in government to kind of like take some of the attention away from the Prime Minister in charge. It's a fitting end, and like some people said that they would be using it as their Christmas card this year, or that the John Lewis ad had really gone up one with those images. But it certainly was striking, and I think it marks the end of an era, doesn't it? If we talked about one of the main people who was, if you mentioned Boris Johnson's government, you'd probably mention the influence of Dominic Cummings in the same sentence. He was that influential, as you thought, on government policy.
And it means the loss of one of the funniest bits on Spitting Image at the moment as well.
I think they're probably spitting feathers, aren't they? Yeah, like that is the one bit. I've tried to watch this new series of Spitting Image, and there's some bits that hit for me and a lot that misses. But the Cummings portrayal was particularly funny. I think they are going to miss him.
Cummings is particularly good. I don't know if we've discussed this previously, but I find Cummings is particularly good. That's particularly funny and worked. And then there's Govey in Paris. I just find hilarious, even though they've only done it twice. And then the other one is Hancock always being told to hide in the corner. It's a very silly bit, but it's very funny every time. And he just kind of looks like a bit of a dweeb in, it's very kind of old school humour, but yeah.
Yes, they've got Hancock's face down to a T. Yeah, it's a very good caricature.
So, as I say, it was attention seeking. Maybe this final photographic moment seems very like something that would be in the thick of it. But why get rid of him now of all times? Like, it seems it kind of almost came out of the blue. I know there was a flurry of activity on that day by professional government watchers all over the internet, but it does seem sudden.
Yeah, I think, well, like I said, it does appear to have come out of the blue, and the fact that I felt that he was immovable, and I felt Dominic Cummings wouldn't want to give up power willingly, particularly when you had a look at his defence, his Barnard Castle defence, which was something where many other people would have taken the hit and said, oh, for the good of the government and for the good of the nation, I will step down and make sure we all keep following these rules. That press conference and the reaction to it, and the way that I felt that Cummings felt he could get away with it, kind of meant that he was ingrained in government and was going to be this Alistair Campbell-like figure who, Alistair Campbell came to represent a lot about the Blair era and how they managed things. And stuck with Blair until the bitter end. I felt Cummings was going to be the same type of person. But I think you've got to look at things like the Barnard Castle moment and realise that this has been something that's been building for a while in the background, and maybe Boris Johnson has been trying to build up the courage or look for an excuse to get rid of him in the near future. So there are a number of reasons why I think Dominic Cummings is a political weakness for Boris Johnson. Let's start with the first one, Barnard Castle, in which we've mentioned it previously. He lost a lot of political capital with that. There are people who looked at that moment and said that was one thing that made lots of people stop following the rules or feel like they could get away with stuff. after we were coming out of lockdown. It was one where the easiest decision to do was to fire him, and he didn't, and it made Boris Johnson appear weak, in my opinion. It seemed that he was beholden on the power of this man, and that this was somebody who was sort of above the rules of everywhere else. And that's been a line that's been repeated through like Labour and SNP circles. Politically, you see them saying this is an example of one rule for the Conservative Party and one rule for everybody else. And if you wanted to look at like the zenith of that phrase, I think it is that Barnard Castle moment. So that must have been playing on Boris Johnson's mind a little bit. Number two, as we've said, he's taking a lot of the spotlight away from Boris. That whole spitting image sketch, that first one where he's talking about eating the baby, isn't he? In that,
yes.
In that spitting image sketch, and he kind of says, "Would you fire me if I ate the baby?" And he goes, "No, of course not," says Boris. The fact that he was seen to be unfireable and the person who was really in charge must have irked Boris Johnson a bit, particularly when he's the man who is, Boris Johnson has not been shy about the fact that he's wanted to be Prime Minister for a lot of his career. And now he's there. I think I would feel irked if I had my advisor taking the spotlight away from me and people thinking that my advisor made all the decisions and I didn't. So I think that's another thing. 3, apparently Dominic Cummings was just very unpleasant to MPs in general, particularly ones where, and this isn't just me kind of speculating, I've seen it from other people and heard it from other political reporters who know what go on behind the scenes. And it's been reflected in the U-turns of the government and how MPs have started to react to briefings coming out of Number 10. Apparently, Dominic Cummings would come around to MPs. MPs might say, "I'm not quite sure about this school meals thing. Can we have a chat about it?" And Dominic Cummings' approach was basically to be quite nasty to them and say, "I don't even know who you are. Why should I listen to your opinion?" Which you might be able to do it when you've got a majority of 80, but we've already seen with this government that they are struggling to keep Tory MPs on side. And even if they win some of the crucial votes in the Houses of Parliament, those U-turns that they've had to do have been forced because there are far too many backbenchers audibly saying, "Hey, I don't agree with policy." And 2, they're not motivated to be loyal to government if that's the sort of attitude that Number 10 is going to give back to them. Previously, backbenchers who want to get into government might be, "Oh yes, of course I'll do that because I want to be on your side, and I think there is actually a legitimate chance of me getting a cabinet position in a future government if I continue to be loyal." With Cummings in there, I felt that a lot of backbenchers simply felt they didn't have a sniff of ever having power, which kind of knocks one of your reasons to be loyal to your party and to your Prime Minister. So I think that's another way that Cummings was maybe a weakness rather than a strength in that government. He's been quite, because of that, he's been quite an outsider in the parliamentary system. He's always come at it from quite a bullish perspective, particularly with the civil service. And, he's always said that he wanted to shake things up and he wanted people not thinking in that frame of mind. That might be an advantage if you're trying to change things, but when you're trying to do things traditionally, that is definitely a disadvantage. And maybe it was just one too many U-turn that was caused by Cummings not quite understanding things. We've already mentioned the communication failings of Lee Kane, and I think Cummings might have been, involved with that, or at least partly responsible. There's a good article by Robert Peston that says that, he believes that Cummings was a great project man. He was great at looking at the big ideas, but a prime minister not only has to be focused on the big ideas, but he also has to be focused on the day-to-day minutiae that come to him. Somebody has to be feeding him that information. And it appears that Cummings was either unwilling to give that information to the prime minister or didn't want somebody else in that role who could give that information to the PM because he wanted it all to go through Cummings. Like Cummings would be the last person to know that before it got to Johnson, and all Johnson's information would be filtered through Dominic. So if you start looking at that perspective, you might be able to see why Boris Johnson appears to not be up on the facts so much in PMQs and made quite a few gaffes where people are like, no, you should be on top of the details. Or Marcus Rashford has come out and said this thing. How are you not knowing that before you say you're not going to do free school meals? Just one too many examples of that happening. And finally, sorry, I know I've gone on a bit, but finally, there's a possible Brexit deal on the horizon. As we know, Dominic Cummings has kind of been Mr. No Deal, or at least I think we can get on without the EU, and has been very bullish in that behaviour. It's likely that there will be a Brexit deal coming through. I know that the EU have already said that, that talks have been more promising this time around as we go down to the deadline, which I don't think is unexpected. I always suspected there would be this bit of Brexit brinkmanship, as we've seen in the past when it came to Boris's oven-ready deal that he got in the previous November, December. If there is a Brexit deal and we do have to compromise on things like fishing and financial a financial regulation, which is likely we're going to have to compromise that if we want to deal with the EU, that would be something that Cummings couldn't stand for, but Boris thinks he can get away with and spin as a great deal for the UK. So with Cummings out the way, he loses that type of block to that decision making, I think, when it comes to Brexit. So yeah, I know that Cummings is a controversial figure, and a lot of people on the left would say, oh, we'd get rid of Cummings in a heartbeat. But when you actually look at some of the him being nasty was not only a detriment to those on the left thinking, oh, isn't he just not a nice person, but it also seemed to be having a lot of impact within the Conservative Party. And I think that's why the Conservative Party has seen him a bit more dysfunctional or broken than they had previously, was because you did have this sort of agitator right at the top who wasn't afraid of stirring things up in sometimes quite a negative way.
I suppose my question is, and it's how I started this segment, is why now? I think it was surprising that he didn't go after the Barnard Castle incident, or maybe was shuffled off more quietly a few weeks later. So why is it that it seems almost like all that stuff that we've known for months has taken a long while to filter through to Boris?
I think maybe this is going to be speculation.
Yes, no, I understand that.
Now,
yeah.
So yeah. So just so I'm giving totally my opinion on it, I think the government's focus has been on Corona and the COVID-19 response, and that has hampered some of those bigger vision things that I think Dominic Cummings would have wanted to focus on. That levelling up agenda that they keep going on about redistributing things to the improving conditions in cities in the north, or making sure that cities in the north have the same amount of investment as those in the south, or London, which appeared to have a lot more capital investment previously. That was kind of the stuff that Cummings was into, and Corona seemed like a distraction, and that meant that he was able to tick along with his stuff in the background and kind of keep his job for a while, I think. Maybe if things had been different, he would have been shoved out the door a bit quicker. And two, I think the fact that Brexit negotiations are coming to an end, we always had this hard deadline of December. If it really looked like no deal was on the cards, I think you definitely see Cummings still remaining in his role. But as it appears now at this late stage that there won't be a no deal and there will be some sort of agreement with the EU, I think it makes his position a lot less tenable, and it might make Cummings less willing to be in government as well. It is a two-way street. Cummings did, kind of essentially resign or walk away. There were reports. I think Peston initially said there was a report of Boris Johnson taking the two of them in their room and giving them a good old telling off, but then he was told that was a lie. And I don't see Boris Johnson acting that way with people. I don't think Boris Johnson is actually very confrontational. He doesn't like being nasty in that way. He's kind of the antithesis of Dominic Cummings in that sense. Boris Johnson wants to be everybody's friend. That's how he likes to be portrayed. So it kind of had to be Cummings' decision as well to go. And the fact that he had his blog where he said, I was probably already going to go in January anyway, and that was written at the start of the year, it maybe makes it a good time for Cummings to go as well. If he goes now, then whatever happens with the Brexit deal, Cummings can wash his hands of it and say, it was a rubbish deal, but I had nothing to do with that, and might leave himself open to another government down the line, depending on who gets in or whatever happens. But I think his options are a bit more open now than if he stuck with the government. The Brexit deal was bad and he had to try and defend it.
So with that all in mind, and with him out on his ear, I suppose, and this is a thing people have wanted for a while. You mentioned some things, like being confrontational with MPs, etc. How do we think this will change government going forwards, if at all? Because, maybe there are problems that aren't all down to Cummings, but it does sound like he was causing some of them.
Yeah, so I think one thing you might see less from government is this culture wars idea, or the way that they approach the opposition side in Parliament. When I saw Boris in Prime Minister's questions, particularly when it came to the subject of Brexit, his responses were almost never on substance, but it was about going against the city Remainer elites and that kind of stuff. The stuff that would stir up culture war tensions and might make somebody in a former red wall but now a blue wall seat vote Conservative when previously they voted Labour. I think that's where Cummings saw his major strength, and that's why it might be one of the reasons why the Leave campaign was able to win back in 2015, because Cummings seemed very adept at stoking up issues that are kind of outside of politics in a way. And bring it. That's the odd thing about these culture wars. They don't touch on what old politics was all about, which was about the detail of things. And if something was, I think we should raise capital gains tax by this much. Oh no, I think we should reduce it slightly. That's not something that's going to get many people fired up. Meanwhile, talking about is the National Trust saying that former slave owners own their house. That's actually not something you can legislate on, but it got people fired up and into a political camp in a weird way. So I think that maybe with Cummings out, you will have future culture wars, and that might lead to a more conciliatory tone from the government, I'm hoping. I know that we've talked about a lot of our, one of the reasons why we started this podcast in one of the reasons I did anyway, one of the reasons I wanted to was because I felt politics had become incredibly divided. People were very tribal, particularly after that Brexit vote that seemed to make things quite nasty. And unfortunately, I think we've got to 2020, and I don't know if things have changed, are any less tribal now. If anything, some things even seem to stir up both sides even more. So I would like to, or I hope that maybe getting somebody who was one of the key directors of that culture war out of that sphere might help to, lend itself to a more we're all in this together style of government.
So you mentioned a few things like focusing on green issues. I think that's definitely a thing. It's definitely a thing I'm passionate about, but I know that the younger generation even more so. We have various things going on with Extinction Rebellion and stuff, and I think everything from Greta Thunberg onwards. I think it's now more in the general consciousness, and it's an important thing to focus on. We just had the announcement that there'll be a ban on the sale of petrol cars from 2030 in the UK, which I think has brought it forward by 5 years. So there's a few things like that. People obviously saying that's not good enough, and then other people saying, how am I going to get a car? But, that's not the discussion we're having right now. But, as at all things, there's a bit of back and forth. This levelling up agenda, this idea that we're going to do better outside of the EU, which I still don't think I truly believe, but I'm glad they're at least trying to put some money into things. But if this is the idea, I feel like maybe this week has slightly undermined this idea that they're going to suddenly change when Cummings is gone. I think people were maybe a bit too upbeat about the power he held. So how have the scandals of the last week or two affected that view?
Yeah, so number one, the big first scandal to hit him was the fact that Boris has had to self-isolate after meeting an MP that after their meeting found out that he was told by the Track and Trace app that he would have to isolate and had been tested positive for coronavirus. Obviously, Boris Johnson has previously had it and had it quite severely, so he'd be keen to make sure that he doesn't get it again. And I don't know if you saw the pictures of this meeting that were widely criticised.
I think they didn't have masks as the main takeaway, right?
They didn't have masks. They probably weren't 2 meters apart. The windows weren't open. It was a lot of things where it was like the meeting could have happened over Zoom. There were a lot of things where people said, well, if you were following your own guidance or what happened, with people in the past, how we're all meant to work with our office environments from home, was this a bit of an unnecessary risk to take in the situation? So that derailed him slightly, and of course has meant that he can't really be front and centre when it comes to big policy announcements. Somebody else is going to have to do it on his behalf. So he loses some of that shine. I know that he performed PMQs from a little isolated bunker, but I saw that and it was a weirdly bad quality of webcam. It was very odd. I was just reminded of the big head in V for Vendetta, the Grand Chancellor, who seems to just always be on a screen. Yes, it was all very, I don't know, if you were looking to really relaunch yourself and have a bright, shiny new Prime Minister, this was not the way you wanted to do it on a webcam from Tesco. Like, you wanted it to be, better than this. So that's the first one that derailed it. The second one is about the behaviour and the report that came out regarding Priti Patel and bullying allegations. I know this is something that we've touched on before when this first happened. It led to... This was a world before COVID. Do you remember that?
I know. It's fun. It's odd to kind of think back. But I mean, we had already raised some concerns about her appointment as well, because, this isn't her first scandal. Like, as we discussed at the time, she was in that scandal about where she went. I've forgotten which country it is now, but like she met
Israel.
Okay, yeah. I was just saying she met Israeli politicians while she was on holiday, which is not okay, basically. And so, that was, we were saying that would have destroyed someone's political career previously. And then, yes, these bullying allegations. So it's kind of surprising how well she's done, because, I suppose we've touched on this a bit with this current government. It seems that, it's more loyalty than necessarily aptitude that will get you somewhere.
Yes, and like her previous dismissal from the government came because she broke the ministerial code. And if the ministerial code is essentially like to put it in like public speak, it's the conditions that of your contract that you have when you work for a company. Everybody signs one, and it'll say something along the lines of, hey, like, don't take drugs at work, or don't take alcohol, or if you're seen to be going against any of these things, we reserve the right to fire you and to terminate your contract, essentially. So I want to make it really clear that breaching the ministerial code of conduct isn't something that's kind of written down in ancient law and is like, it's not like the pirate code, it's not just guidelines. It's meant to be something that's binding. However, the ministerial code, for some bizarre reason, isn't legally binding. It is up to the discretion of the person who oversees that code, which is ultimately the Prime Minister. So we've got these bullying allegations that have been hanging over Priti Patel's head since February, and a report was issued. It was sort of commissioned to be taken part by Sir Alex Allen, who said that he would investigate this because it had led to the resignation of a very senior civil servant in Priti Patel's department, and see what came up. Apparently, this report has been sitting on Boris Johnson's desk for months. So I don't know. Maybe the fact that this report came out after Cummings has gone, maybe Cummings wanted to stop it coming out or felt that it wasn't important. That's pure conjecture at the moment. But it does seem odd that it came out at this time. Leaked versions of the report suggested that Priti Patel had breached the ministerial code, but maybe not intentionally, which is an odd phrase. I don't know how you bully somebody by accident repeatedly, but it appears that was what had happened. And the suggestion from Sir Alex Allen was that she had broken the code, which kind of means that she should lose her job. Next came a bizarre 24-hour period where Tory MPs on Twitter all started to say what a lovely person Priti Patel was to work with. And let me just see. I will quickly grab the tweet. If you want to look it up, Tom, sorry, it is from Nicholas Pegg, at Nicholas Pegg, a day ago. Who says, here's a handy guide to the Conservatives' orchestrated Priti Patel script. Highlights include hardworking 7 times, kind 6 times, determined 3 times, deliver 11 times, tough 10 times, tough job 3 times, and one of the toughest jobs around 3 times. Luckily, we're all stupid and we'll never notice. So it is clear that the members of Cabinet or senior Conservative officials had been briefed on what to say and all to rally around Priti and say that, yeah, no, she probably shouldn't go for this. If she's accidentally bullied somebody, it's because it's a very tough job being Home Secretary. And we've all been there, and she's lovely to me in private. The next day, as it came out, Boris Johnson unsurprisingly decided not to act on the report. But not only did he, by not acting, essentially he said that he disagreed with the results of the report that said that she had ever breached the ministerial code of conduct in the first place, and that in his view, it was fine. Which then, of course, led to the resignation of the man who wrote the report, Sir Alex Allen, because basically, once the Prime Minister has rejected your opinion, even though I believe in his resignation speech he said that, he respects that the Prime Minister has that right to reject his opinion, but it would make him think, is he going to respect my opinion in the future when I do this? So he resigned. Now, it is worth saying that in these type of culture war type things, there were a few Tory MPs and there were a few people kind of suggesting that, oh, this is just another attack by the woke brigade on Priti Patel. People don't like her anyway. The civil service particularly doesn't like her because she's trying to shake things up. That's why the report was so negative for her. I would say in response to that Sir Alex Allen was appointed by David Cameron, worked under John Major for years. He's hardly Karl Marx. He's quite a middle-of-the-road, probably conservative civil servant who's working to that agenda. So the report is meant to be independent. It produced an independent result. What's worrying is that the government and Boris Johnson decided not to follow the recommendation of that to save Priti Patel. Now, we've talked about why Dominic Cummings was maybe it was a good time to fire him. Why is it a bad time to fire Priti Patel? And why does Boris Johnson feel that he can't lose her from cabinet? Well, I think that she's very liked amongst the right of the party because of her tough views on crime and particularly on immigration. She's been one of the figureheads for that policy of, really tightening up immigration laws after we've left the EU. And that is a view that's quite popular more amongst the general public than it is within the actual Conservative Party. But she represents that faction very well. Also, she's from an ethnic minority background and is female. So I don't like saying this, but she does tick a lot of boxes for the Conservative Party in that way, who is traditionally seen as a party of old white men. To have a figurehead like that in government, she is a good person to have in cabinet and say, look, we're tremendously diverse in a lot of ways, and here's the proof, here's Priti Patel. I can't really think of another high-profile figure who would be able to instantly step into her shoes in that way. So she does seem that she's made herself, irreplaceable, no matter what she does, but I don't think it's helped move the Conservatives away from that kind of I said one of the problems of Cummings was that they were seen as nasty or uncaring, particularly because Cummings was seen in that vein by refusing to acknowledge bullying of the civil service in anti-bullying week, of all things, and trying to brush this under the carpet. It doesn't make, if Boris wanted to go back to being good old nice Boris, aren't we all lovely, isn't he fun to laugh at as a zip wire? This is just something that's kind of undermined that once again.
Yeah. I don't really have much to add on this, I don't think. I think we've gone into a lot of detail there, and that's very good. I think maybe the only thing to kind of add in is I did see a kind of narrative where people were saying, oh, well, she's only being picked on because she's a woman, etc. But I think that the report is quite damning of her behaviour. I don't get the impression that's what it was at all. But then there was a whole kind of so it was kind of a four-dimensional chess moment where they were kind of saying, well, the Tories are defending her, and then they're getting people to tweet out saying, oh, well, it's only because she's a woman she's being attacked. And then it was but are they actual? It was a whole thing going on Twitter where it was one of these things where realistically at this point it's hard to pick apart who was saying what at what time. But yes, no, I think you're right that it's very hard for them to find someone who replaces her and not accidentally end up with the all-male white cabinet again, which I think is definitely a problem the Conservative Party has. They like to be oh, we're really inclusive, but they don't have many people they can put into those positions. If they were more inclusive, then this wouldn't be a problem. I think would be my summary. Yeah. As we're kind of wrapping up, we We don't really have any polls to talk about this week. So I think maybe, did we want to just briefly mention in passing what's going on over in America still, which is that Trump still hasn't actually conceded, even though it seems like he's understood?
Yep. Trump's not conceding, and his main lawyer's head is leaking live on TV, is the big scandal. It's bizarre what's happening over there, and a bit saddening. I do think that, we mentioned in our last episode when it was announced that Trump was likely to fight on many fields, but he had to fight in 6 separate states. And since our last episode and this one, he's lost many key lawsuits on the matter in almost every state. He managed to get a recount in Georgia, but that recount has now been concluded and Biden is still the winner. The only major mistake that was found there was they found a stash of ballots that hadn't been counted. And that slightly reduced Biden's margin, but obviously not enough to tip the state in his favour. He's been trying to influence people who, once a result goes through, there's a formal council of people that have to basically rubber stamp it. And he has been calling in legislators from both Michigan and in Pennsylvania, trying to influence them and saying hey, you're Republican, can you not say that this is okay so we can buy us some more time? Which is definitely what you shouldn't do and seems like a big abuse of power. But the more he gets rejected, the more these results are made official. It's becoming more and more impossible for him to overturn the results. So his only other tactic is basically for him to say repeatedly that the system is rigged without providing any evidence. And at least he'll have won culturally, maybe, or at least he will have convinced the many Americans that were on his side before that Joe Biden is not a legitimate president, even though he is. The strategy is really odd, and I think it is losing steam. But unfortunately, in the past 2 weeks, Donald Trump's tweets and in a news conference that he did last night, I think he said I won, right? I won with 74 million, but he's still saying it. So he hasn't come to terms with it at all. It's getting a bit sad now. I think the one reassuring thing I can say is that I don't think that there's any chance that Donald Trump will be able to find a legitimate way to stay in the White House beyond January. It's just not going to happen. So it will come to an
I think
end.
I might point people to, offer in the show notes, there's a few links from Legal, which is a really good YouTube channel based in the US where they go through he's a lawyer and he talks about the law, but he's done a few on Trump and can he call in the Supreme Court, things like that, and goes through all of those different cases that are before the courts, and where there have been results, he goes through the results, what it means. So I think that's quite good. And he also talks about how, removing the Trump from the White House. And basically the answer is as soon as, the inauguration happens, as soon as that time ticks out, he no longer is the commander of the Secret Service. So it doesn't matter what he wants to do. The Secret Service belonged to Biden at that point, even though he technically has a security detail. There's lots of reasons why those members, there's not going to be a shootout in the White House because, the Secret Service agents are still Secret Service agents, not Trump's personal employees. But I'll point people to that in the show notes. The only other thing I wanted to share was a post from the Huffington Post that I've just seen, which is more Republican senators have contracted coronavirus than have agreed that Joe Biden has won the election at this point, which is one of those kind of disturbing facts that's come out of this election.
It has been surprising to me how much of the Republican Party is still backing Trump's view of events. You would expect, when the result was still maybe up in the air and they were still counting, I can understand why a senator would be less likely to congratulate Joe Biden quickly, because Trump could be your boss still. But the fact that Trump is definitely not going to be your boss in the future, and the fact that you're not Donald Trump, you're a senator and you might not have that same charisma or get away with it, I don't know who it benefits to keep undermining that and not working with Biden for this. That's my one odd thing that I find about it, that the Republican Party should identify Trump as a loser and say we want to get rid of that, move on from that. Any other person who got defeated, you look at it in British politics, you look at American politics, if you lose an election, you are branded a loser. Sorry, move on. We'll find another person to fulfill your role and we'll hook our cart to that horse. The fact that they are still persisting with supporting Donald Trump is bizarre to me, and maybe reflects that they think that either Trump or that style of politics has a real shot in 2024. I mean, he did win an awful lot of votes. He, increased the number of votes that he got. It's just that the other guy got a lot more.
So kind of referring back to our last episode, I think it'll be interesting to see how the Republican Party moves on from this, because...
Or if they do.
Yeah, or if they do. I don't know if they could put Trump forward in 2024 as a viable candidate. Like, I don't know what he'll be like in 4 years, I mean, he's already fairly old, but he's not as old as Biden. So there is that argument. Or maybe they, as we said last time, they might try and go for a younger face of the Trump family. But it would be weird if the Republicans end up being the Trump party for the foreseeable future. Well, thank you as always for joining me, Rob. It was a bit of a change, I think, from dealing with all the coronavirus stuff to actually have some political intrigue in the UK for once. Came with something. It was very the thick of it, very like Amanda Iannucci had penned it. As always, thank you for joining me and giving me your insights. For people who want to support us, you can share the podcast with people tell them why you like it and why they should listen. You can go to all of our various websites that are linked everywhere. So you can find us on parliamentary.observer. You can find us at facebook.com/unparliamentary. You can find us at reddit.r/unparliamentary. And you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at unparlpodcast. And of course, if you go to patreon.com/TTSS, you'll be able to throw some money our way to help pay for hosting, pay for microphones and other gear that we have, pay for a subscription to Adobe so that I can actually edit the podcast, and a variety of other things. So yeah, throw some money our way and you'll get bonus content of Rob and I waffling on about our lives before we actually start recording. And I think there's nothing else left for me to say other than it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Join Mike and Tom for nerdy conversation with a multitude of guests on Hat of Many Things.
Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
I'm Mark, a librarian and professional wrestling ring announcer.
Cast League of Legends.
Soteros Philbricato, best known for my work with White Wolf and Onyx Path Publishing on the World of Darkness.
Hi, I'm Jason Carl. I'm the producer of V5 at White Wolf.
Yeah, my name is Johanna Pettersson. I'm a Finnish game designer.